There is something Judaism, Christianity and Islam can all agree on. Certain statements and actions belong exclusively to God. In this video, I'm gonna share one of my favorite deity claims by Jesus. It's not only rich in theology, it's also a quite funny one. All the synoptic gospel accounts mention this story: Mark 2, Matthew 9 and Luke 5. We will read it from Mark because it's both the earliest record of them all and my favorite gospel accounts. And I'll explain why in this video, by the way. So then, let's go to Mark chapter 2, verse 1 to 12. Go there and read the full passage for yourself. Many of you who are watching this already know this story, but maybe you haven't approached the text and thought about it in the way and angle that I'm going to show you here. So, let's have a look at this profound and quite funny deity claim by Jesus. See you after the intro. Now, in this passage, you will notice that when Jesus was preaching to a large group of people, 4 men squeezed their way through the crowd in order to try and get to Jesus with their friend, a paralytic man, going to the extreme of removing the roof on the house where Jesus was teaching. Imagine if that was your home. Anyway, they did that so they could lower the paralytic man down to Jesus on the bed that they were carrying him on. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Not all, but many skeptics, especially Muslim propagandists, will stop at this verse and say something like, "No, this is not a deity claim. Jesus is not claiming to be God and the forgiver of sins here. He is just saying this like in the same sense as a Roman Catholic priest at a confession or something." Well, maybe if you ignore the rest of the gospel account, sure. But if you keep reading it, including the very next verse here, we read, "Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, 'Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?'" Throughout the gospel accounts, the scribes, the teachers of the law, the priests, the Pharisees, and the high priest Caiaphas react and say how they do about Jesus' sayings and actions, because they are not modern skeptics in 2023, but ancient Jews from 2000 years ago, not being in any doubt about who Jesus was claiming to be, about who he was making himself to be. And what's so funny about this particular event and passage is that Jesus does not leave any room for doubting that for the people and scribes who were present there. And I'll show why in a second, but let's just first read the rest of the passage, verse 8 to 12. "And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, 'Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Rise, take up your bed and walk"? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." He said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed and go home." And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they all were amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." Jesus, perceiving in his spirit. Every time Mark is using this phrase in his account, he's referring to the divine nature of Jesus. What is going on so profoundly and rather quite funny here in Mark 2 with Jesus, the scribes and the paralytic man is that Jesus is confronting the scribes in the crowd who were thinking in their hearts that Jesus is blaspheming because he's making himself out to be God when he said, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Jesus, God incarnate, knew in his spirit that they were thinking this, as we just read. Jesus had just made a deity claim as the forgiver of sins, something all the Jews in the crowd knew that only God, Yahweh, had the authority to do. But ultimately, this hard and blasphemous for Jews deity claim was still in of itself at the end of the days only verbal, like invisible. The scribes could not see that Jesus was the forgiver of sins. It was an incredible dangerous thing to say at that time and place, especially in a crowd full of Jews. But the point being, at the end of the days, this was an invisible deity claim. Many could have just seen Jesus as ultimately a well-spoken crazy guy. So to make it fully clear, and to make them all stunned before anything would happen, he also shows them visible that he is God incarnate, as he tells the paralytic man in front of everyone that not only is his sins forgiven, he can also stand up, pick up his bed, and walk himself home. And the paralytic man does exactly that, walking out in front of everyone, forgiven and healed. He backed up his invisible deity claim with a visible deity claim. As Jesus is saying in John 10:38, if you don't believe in me, believe in the works I'm doing, so you may understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father.